Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
Son, I am very sick, and I ask that you listen to me in a hoarse voice, his father said. Harry was lying in a hospital bed. Even though it was a VIP room, he didn't feel happy. The man had only recently been here. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis, which was in the active stage is quite a dangerous disease, as it often ends in death. It's quite rare nowadays because of the corporatization. But Harry, like the rest of his community, had never been immunized. I'm listening to you, Dad. Felix spoke up. Somehow I've already figured it out. I have a fatal disease, Dad started, and then he started coughing. It can be cured. However, the doctors said that I am on. Harry couldn't finish. A coughing fit came over him again. When he was in so much pain, they had to call a nurse to give him an injection, which Felix did. After a few minutes, his father was able to speak again. You just take your time, hurriedly whispered caring guy, covering his father's hand with his palm. Well, in the first stages of still help pills, antibiotics. But I'm already old, Felix, and these drugs will not help me. I'll probably have to go under the surgical knife, but you know that's not my choice. So now listen to me carefully. The son nodded understandingly. Me and your mom. Harry waved his head back, pointing to the woman who sat after him. The man gave another cough and continued with me and Sophia. We want you to get married, son. Harry didn't continue because he saw son's eyes rounded. He didn't like that statement. His eyebrows tensed and lowered again. He was indignant. However, like an obedient son, he said nothing. We've already found you a nice girl, the father continued. Realizing that his son was trying to be patient, Felix's gaze shifted to his mother. She smiled and tried to support her son with gestures, urging him to agree. But he suddenly decided to change the accepted line of behavior in the family. No, the boy cut off. I am definitely against this proposal. Son, understand me. I'm an old man at death's door, and I want to make sure my son chooses his wife. According to our covenants and requirements, Harry insisted. A girl of our faith. And you know how hard it is to find a family here that is dedicated. Felix rolled his eyes and removed his palm from his father's hand. Who is she? The boy muttered offensively. This girl was born in the same village we came from with your mom. So she's a beggar, Felix blurted without hiding his indignation. Of course, he was not a major, though he lived in a wealthy family. The boy had been brought up well enough, never divided people by race, appearance, or money. He treated the poor well, fulfilled the requirements of his family religion. However, the guy did not want to see his wives as beggars, for almost all of them, with few exceptions, were ugly and stupid. Such was his personal prejudice. Don't call your future wife that. What kind of upbringing is that? Where is the respect for your father? Harry said angrily. Harry, Sophia exclaimed, turning to her husband. Harry slowly turned to his wife. Why am I wrong? He has no right to talk like that about the girl I found for him. The son rolled his eyes once more, abruptly stood up and left the room. Sophia moved closer to Harry's husband. Darling, but why did you have to go off on him like that? Depressed, the woman sighed. He has only just begun to realize in some state, and he is not 16 years old. Sophia, he's a mature young man who I thought was mature enough to have this conversation. Stop coddling him. He needs a wife, Sophia. And I found the perfect girl, the man said sternly. Harry had another coughing fit and could no longer speak. Sophia looked sympathetically at her sick husband and hoped that her son would fulfill his last will. Honey, are you busy? Asked the mother, entering Felix's office. That same day in the evening, he was sorting out some documents. Son, I am very sick, and I ask that you listen to me in a hoarse voice, his father said. Harry was lying in a hospital bed. Even though it was a VIP room, he didn't feel happy. The man had only recently been here. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis, which was in the active stage is quite a dangerous disease, as it often ends in death. It's quite rare nowadays because of the corporatization. But Harry, like the rest of his community, had never been immunized. I'm listening to you, Dad. Felix spoke up. Somehow I've already figured it out. I have a fatal disease. Dad started, and then he started coughing. It can be cured. However, the doctors said that I am on. Harry couldn't finish. A coughing fit came over him again. When he was in so much pain, they had to call a nurse to give him an injection, which Felix did. After a few minutes, his father was able to speak again. You just take your time, hurriedly whispered caring guy, covering his father's hand with his palm. Well, in the first stages of still help pills, antibiotics. But I'm already old, Felix, and these drugs will not help me. I'll probably have to go under the surgical knife, but you know that's not my choice. So now listen to me carefully. The son nodded understandingly. Me and your mom. Harry waved his head back, pointing to the woman who sat after him. The man gave another cough and continued with me and Sophia. We want you to get married, son. Harry didn't continue because he saw son's eyes rounded. He didn't like that statement. His eyebrows tensed and lowered again. He was indignant. However, like an obedient son, he said nothing. We've already found you a nice girl, the father continued. Realizing that his son was trying to be patient, Felix's gaze shifted to his mother. She smiled and tried to support her son with gestures, urging him to agree. But he suddenly decided to change the accepted line of behavior in the family. No, the boy cut off. I am definitely against this proposal. Son, understand me. I'm an old man at death's door, and I want to make sure my son chooses his wife. According to our covenants and requirements, Harry insisted. A girl of our faith. And you know how hard it is to find a family here that is dedicated. Felix rolled his eyes and removed his palm from his father's hand. Who is she? The boy muttered offensively. This girl was born in the same village we came from with your mom. So she's a beggar, Felix blurted without hiding his indignation. Of course, he was not a major, though he lived in a wealthy family. The boy had been brought up well enough, never divided people by race, appearance, or money. He treated the poor well, fulfilled the requirements of his family religion. However, the guy did not want to see his wives as beggars, for almost all of them, with few exceptions, were ugly and stupid. Such was his personal prejudice. Don't call your future wife that. What kind of upbringing is that? Where is the respect for your father? Harry said angrily. Harry, Sophia exclaimed, turning to her husband. Harry slowly turned to his wife. Why am I wrong? He has no right to talk like that about the girl I found for him. The son rolled his eyes once more, abruptly stood up and left the room. Sophia moved closer to Harry's husband. Darling, but why did you have to go off on him like that? Depressed, the woman sighed. He has only just begun to realize in some state, and he is not 16 years old. Sophia, he's a mature young man who I thought was mature enough to have this conversation. Stop coddling him. He needs a wife, Sophia. And I found the perfect girl, the man said sternly. Harry had another coughing fit and could no longer speak. Sophia looked sympathetically at her sick husband and hoped that her son would fulfill his last will. Honey, are you busy? Asked the mother, entering Felix's office. That same day in the evening, he was sorting out some documents. The desk was a terrible mess, as was the whole room in general. His mother never entered the place without asking, because she knew that her son should not be distracted when he was working. They lived in the same apartment, but it was very large and could accommodate 3 families at once. Felix's parents were engaged in the florist Chechen business, had a network of flower stores, invested in securities, and Felix also knew stock quotes and made good money on it in addition to the parental income. Harry used to run the family business, and his son helped him. However, when the man fell ill, Felix began to solve all the cases himself. He was a savvy and intelligent young man for his 23 years. He knew a lot about running a business and economy, and about working with people. He really managed to handle all the issues in the absence of his father and the client. The flow was only increasing every quarter, and so was the income. Sophia was proud of him. Though she never got into the business, her husband and son always shared their successes with her, and she was the fairy of a cozy home. Sophia was also fond of Florentine and sometimes supervised the designers who decorated the shop windows. And sometimes she had a hand in it herself, which brought her immense pleasure. Their family was strong. Everyone supported each other and lived in perfect harmony. Felix loved his mother very much. She was gentle, attentive, caring, and, in general, had all the qualities of a good wife, mother, and mistress. His father was strict, demanding, but fair and kind. Never condemned people, gave sound advice, and sometimes punished for the cause, believing that it is not necessary to wait until fate itself will give Felix life lessons. The guy loved his parents very much. They really always supported him in all endeavors, and he was very happy about it. "Ladies, come in," replied Felix without raising his head. He was now carefully looking through the documents because he decided to get rid of unnecessary papers that were no longer needed. Sophia quietly entered the study, sat down on the chair opposite the desk. "I'm listening to you," Mamia said affectionately to her son. "I wanted to talk to you about this morning's conversation with your father," the woman explained her intentions. Felix immediately changed in his face. He became more gloomy and dissatisfied. His mother seemed to notice his frown and added, "Don't be so skeptical. Your father and I want what's best for you. Don't you see our efforts? Please understand your father's situation. He's dying, Felix, and he wants to make things right for you, to help you help me. Who needs help getting married? Why can't I find a girl I'll love, who'll be the right mom? My father and I wouldn't mind that. But time is running out. You won't have time to find a girl of the same faith as ours. And that's exactly what my father would want. It's very important. Son, this is the history of our family, our ancient lineage, of which we are all so proud. You must make your way with a woman of the Tao. In this, I'm afraid you have no choice. Can you imagine how many generations of our ancestors have adhered to this righteous faith? How many have suffered for it? What a long way they traveled, bringing Taoism here to Russia. We must honor and remember them, son. Accept your fate. Do not anger the spirit of our fathers. Well, if I don't want to go on, why do I have to practice this religion? Maybe I don't believe in it at all. Maybe I'm an atheist or agnostic." The guy parried the woman. The woman's heart even sank. "What are you talking about?" she said in amazement, Felix. "I do not recognize you. You want to give up our faith, which my father and I have carried through so many generations, in which we brought up and raised you our only son, our heir." "Perhaps," the son muttered. So said Sophia, changing her tone to one that the astonished son had never heard from his quiet and kind mother. "Your father didn't marry me for love either. But as you can see, he and I are very fond of each other. You're marrying this girl because those are the rules. And if you want to be part of our family, our big family," Mother added threateningly, "then you will have to accept it." With those words, the woman got up from her chair and walked towards the exit of the room. "If I really had a choice, I wouldn't have been born into your family," bitterly whispered the son. However, the woman heard it. She rolled her shoulders sorrowfully, but said nothing more. She was hurt that Felix didn't want to realize how important this was to them. They were doing so well, and this idyll would have continued until Felix became more and more understanding about the 3 pure to keep my husband alive, to prolong it yet let him heal from his serious illness. I pray you." Habitually, the woman called out to her gods. All night she prayed, pored over rosary beads, cleansed her soul with them, trying to reach the divine essence. And with the first rays of sunlight, she felt much better. "Son, I have something to tell you," Sophia said at breakfast. What else did Felix say? Choking on his cereal. "Daddy's condition has worsened. He needs emergency surgery to remove part of his lungs." The woman said sadly, "We've decided we need to improve our chances of success and intend to go to Germany. They have the best clinic in Europe. Many difficult patients have been treated there. Therefore, your father and I hope for a favorable outcome and want to enlist your support." Felix listened carefully to his mother. This plan was really good in Germany, true, some of the most advanced medical technology in the whole world. However, what kind of support would they expect from him? Financially, the family was fine with money. Of course, his parents expect him, Felix, to fulfill their request and get married as soon as possible. "I take it you're still talking about the same thing?" asked the boy to his mother. "What do you think, son?" Question to question, Sophia answered. I guess I'll have to get married after all." The woman frowned, but there was a maternal tenderness in her gaze. "Yes, son. If you respect and love your father, will you do it?" "I'm right." Felix thought for a moment and nodded. He knew that he would not go against the will of his father, who was at death's door. The boy loved his father, and if for his father's peace of mind he needed to get married, he would do it. "So when will I see my bride?" the young man asked, rising from his chair. "The engagement is in 3 days. At the ceremony, the girl's father will give his traditional consent to the wedding. You will meet their family. Everything will be fine." The mother tried to cheer up her son. Of course, it didn't encourage him in any way. But Felix appreciated his mother's efforts. She really wished him happiness and hoped that he would find his love in this girl. Even if not immediately, but it would happen sooner or later. The woman looked fondly at her son. He had matured so much and become a real man. That's how she always dreamed of raising him. Sophia herself lived in poverty and was married off to just such a poor guy from the same village of her dear Harry. But they managed to make a good life, moved to the city, had a boy, and lived happily ever after. She couldn't believe that it could all come crashing down in an instant. All their dreams of growing old together could go down the drain. But life is unpredictable. Nothing lasts forever, and it's only by knowing this that we gain immortality. She believed in the Tao. Her husband believed in the Tao. They would be immortal because they knew the truth. This knowledge warmed her soul and supported her in the most difficult moments, when it seemed that nothing would pull her out of the bottom. The Tao is eternal. "We're not, son. I'm glad you listened to my will," Harry said into the receiver of the telephone. "Dad, what are the guarantees for the success of the operation?" My son changed the subject. There was silence in response. That hardly meant anything good. "In the best-case scenario, part of one of my lungs will be removed. The painful part, followed by a transplant, so I can live a normal life. I didn't want this operation, you know, but your mother insisted, and I couldn't refuse her." The son didn't answer anything. He didn't know how to support a man who was facing a very risky operation. Harry was on the verge of life and death, and those close to him could only manfully watch him suffer. Yes, to try and ease that suffering a little. "You'll be at the engagement party. Has the son finally spoken?" "Yes, as long as my condition allows it. So I won't leave you there with your mother," Harry tried to joke. The day of the engagement came. The bride's family received the dear guests. This village was called. The flight here with one layover followed by a 2-hour ride in a comfortable cab. It was long and tedious. But Harry, who'd been drugged beforehand, was doing well. The family name was Singh, and they were descended from an ancient Chinese family. Cindy, like Felix's family, had moved from China many years ago and were now documented English, but with Chinese surnames. They did not change it or translate it in any way, but left it untouched in memory of their ancestors. The girl's family was small. Parents, daughter, and son the same age as Felix. Also with them lived a grandmother, who was already well over 92 families, seated in a large outdoor gazebo. The bride's parents were poor, but very intelligent people. They themselves set a delicious meal. The table was occupied by the guests with interesting conversations. Sophia's brothels were very pleased with the future relatives. But of course, it was impossible not to notice in what poverty they lived. The wooden house was already rotten Midas in some places. It seemed that the building even swayed a little. The windows were wooden, and of course let in the cold and moisture. They didn't even have a gas supply, and the electricity was supplied with frequent interruptions. That is why candles were still used here. The main source of heat was the stove, which occupied a good half of the largest room in the house, and an old grandmother slept in a large and warm bed above the stove. It looked quite nice and eco-friendly. However, the people who lived in such conditions were deprived of something. After all, while technology was advancing, and mankind has already created computers' internet, and even came close to creating an artificial mind. In this house, they had no idea about a regular cell phone. Finally, the bride herself came to the table, dressed in a national costume of red color, with amazingly beautiful golden embroidery. That was the end of the beauty in the girl's appearance. Felix was simply shocked. He, of course, expected all sorts of things, but this. His future wife was not just ugly, she was ugly, like an ugly toad. Liquid, short hair, very narrow dark eyes, almost closed, puffy cheeks, and countless moles, more like warts all over her face. No, he clearly didn't want a wife like that. Not that Felix judged people based on appearance. However, there wouldn't even be the right words here. Subjective point of view, if you make an effort and try to be objective with despair, Felix thought. Beautiful appearance is an important factor in choosing a spouse, because otherwise we won't have beautiful children. In addition, these terrible moles, perhaps it is some kind of genetic disease. The girl, no matter how you look at it, you can only see the downside. And no matter how much the young man tried, he could not find a single plus. Maybe she was at least smart, educated. Let not be unlucky with the appearance, but the inner world of a person may be also beautiful. In despair persuaded himself Guy. However, the hopes of Felix to find in her at least something interesting faded by the minute. But still he tried happiness. And what do? Honored ones? Let me know your name. With a polite smile, asked Felix Moon. The girl introduced herself. My name is Moon, dear Moon, the boy repeated with a smile. He was a little surprised at this name, because it was originally Chinese, and at the accent with which the girl pronounced it. But it seems that this Russian-Chinese family decided to follow the ancient traditions to the end. I mainly do needlework, and began the girl and hesitated. Shut up. Looked at her mother with a very strange praying look, as if she did not know what exactly to answer her. And I read a lot. I have a lot of different useful books, added with doubt in Moon's voice. What do you prefer, the classics? Or perhaps you study the works of our esteemed philosophers? Started to interrogate poor Felix with vigor. Oh, I shyly began the bride and stammered. She looked meaningfully at her mother again. This is where the bride's father stepped in, apparently in order to somehow hide the awkward pause. Well, I think the young people are now acquainted, and I give my consent to this marriage. Harry nodded solemnly, agreeing with the words of his future relative. He stood up and folded his hands in a grateful gesture, bowed to everyone and left, leaving behind a pungent floral scent. Felix felt completely disappointed. Well, what did he really expect? Now the idea of becoming the husband of this bad girl seemed terrifying to him. The girl had obviously lied to him about the books. It was obvious, because an enthusiastic person could say a lot about literature even for a couple of minutes. Of course, the option that she was shy was not excluded, but the guy was firmly convinced that this girl was fit only for a dishwasher. He didn't want a wife like that, a perfectly promising wife who would just please her husband at the thought of how exactly she would do it. He just twitched with disgust. She was ugly complexioned, clearly poorly educated. All of these were qualities that Felix certainly never wanted to see in his spouse. Damn it, let others sort out such young ladies. Inwardly flared up Guy. Obviously, many fanatics would like them, but not him. He was looking for a girl who was beautiful, free, had her own views and principles. But now he had no other choice. Only marriage. Obviously, this marriage would benefit both families. Moon's parents would use this kind of kinship to set up their own. Daughter Felix's parents would find peace and happiness for a son who married a girl of his faith. And the guy realized that he was stuck in all this up to his ears. Giving up his family was not an option, or they would have disowned him. He consoled himself only with the fact that even with all the orthodoxy of their community, so that it was empty. Divorce had never been abolished in this country. He'd have to get married. What can you do? But then he's bound to divorce her after a while. Mom, please. I don't want to marry a girl I don't love. Felix made one last attempt. When they got home, Sophia was cleaning up after dinner, and Harry was resting on the sofa, reading a book, occasionally reminding himself with a loud cough, "We'll get along." Mother exhaled. She was clearly tired of these conversations. The woman understood how difficult it was for her son to take this step. Sophia remembered her husband, who also tried to escape from the wedding to the last, but in the end they got married and began to live happily. Everything in this life can be endured, she continued. You don't know what she'll be like in marriage. You shouldn't be so desperate right away. What happens if I don't marry this girl? That's out of the question. But if you decide to do that, you'll ruin our family relationship forever. You must realize that they are doing this for money. Felix pleaded. Do they want money? Yes, it's undeniable. What we need is a marriage to a pure girl of your faith. That is your father's will, and as a son, you must fulfill it. That's right, Sophia. A man in the other corner of the room chimed in. The woman finished washing the dishes, wiped her hands on a towel, and looked at her son with a smile and tenderness. Honey, I'm sure you're very wrong in your beliefs. You'll see. Your father and I have found a wonderful match for you. Felix suppressed, nodded, and left for his room. As he was about to enter the bedroom, he heard a muffled dialogue between his mother and father. He decided to cautiously eavesdrop on his parents' conversation. Opal, is this really so necessary? In a concerned voice, Sophia asked, I must, while I am alive, see my son who has acquired a wife of his faith. Yes, I may not see my grandchildren, but I will have peace of mind, knowing that my son has a worthy woman with whom he will continue our lineage. Harry replied firmly, Perhaps we were too hasty. We always wanted him to marry for love, to take his time, to find him a good match, a girl worthy of him. Did I raise him to have such an unhappy union? That's how we got together and got out of this backwater. Sophia and up. I think that our son too, if we raised him to be a real man, will be able to provide the same good life for his wife and then for his children. What if we're making a mistake? What if we're making our son a miserable Harry? I don't want him to hate us for the rest of his life. A woman cried. I understand your worries, honey, but please trust me, he'll be fine. In the following minutes, only bitter sobs of the mother were heard. And Felix didn't know that his mother was so worried about him. She really only wanted the best for him. It made him think about a lot of things. Would a mother be willing to make her own son miserable for the sake of some kind of faith? Why did they care so much about her? It should be noted that the guy had never shown much interest in Taoism. For him, any religion seemed something strange and artificial, absolutely unnecessary. People invented some gods, and each nation had their own, and everyone thought they were the only real ones. Nonsense. People need a higher mind or power to just calm themselves down and give their lives meaning. Who would want to? It's pointless to go through life knowing that at the end of it there will be nothing. Everyone, or almost everyone, has to believe in something. Otherwise, mankind is doomed. But Felix, like most young people, was sure that there is nothing divine in the world. For him, God was only science. But since he madly loved his mother, the guy from childhood pretended to believe, and for him not an empty sound performed all the rituals, observed traditions. Once they even traveled to China, to the historical homeland, to immerse themselves in Taoism, as in the Celestial Empire was the birthplace of this faith. And of course, the followers and temples there were innumerable. However, with each year of his growing up, he went more and more into science. He studied at the Faculty of Geology, helped his father with business, and began to devote less and less time to spiritual life. Of course, his mother was not happy about this development, and once even forced him into a serious conversation. You are attending our school less and less. You are rarely in the temple. You've stopped meditating and practicing. Mom, you should finally realize that I am not interested in all this. Felix interrupted the woman. What do you mean, not interested? This is your faith. I want to devote my life to science, and Taoism has no place in it. Sophia put his hand to his mouth in a tragic gesture. What the hell do you think you're doing? How dare you say such things? Your father is also not the last man in this life and a successful businessman. But that doesn't stop him from continuing on his path of following the Tao. Have you forgotten the main point of our existence on this earth? The world is full of religion, Mom, and everyone is talking about something different. But I don't think I'll ever be able to join one. It's all foreign to me. The woman sat back in her chair and shook her head. No, Felix, if you give up your faith, you give up me and your father. You will have no family. Is that what you want? So you're willing to give up your own son for your faith. It's the way of the world. We just go with the flow of life. And if you deny me, I will not resist. because resistance is a path to nowhere. Felix shook his head and left the room. He loved his mother and father very much, but at the same time he hated everything about this fucking religion. The guy thought it was moronic. After all, denying death, denying the natural course of things, denying nature itself, there would be no immortality. Our spirit will not be overpowered. It is in the soul of our children. We will simply die. There will be emptiness next. The end. However, after giving it some thought, he made a wise decision. Mom, I'm sorry for everything I said. I was wrong, and I'm ready to continue to give myself to my faith, Felix declared to his mother. Smiled sincerely. She was very glad that her son understood her and stayed in the bosom of family and religion. The woman could not resist him and was insanely happy for the decision her son had made. The boy, on the other hand, was terribly disappointed that for most of his life he would have to pretend and follow the will of his parents. But he just couldn't afford to leave them. They had done so much for him, invested so much in him. Felix had an obligation to repay them by loving their faith. After all, that meant respect and gratitude for their labor. The next morning became very hard for the boy. After yesterday's obedient dialogue of his parents, he felt uncomfortable. Felix felt very awkward at breakfast, which passed in complete silence. Finally, his mother raised her voice. Felix, my father, and I have news for you. The boy immediately tensed up. It did not bode well. Usually his mother tried to prepare the others for a serious topic. As you know, my father needs surgery. She started from a distance. We thought we had more time, but unfortunately, there is no time left at all. We'll have to leave for Germany as early as tomorrow. Felix shouted. Yes, Harry spoke up. But don't act like a capricious girl and get married. The engagement has already taken place. I expect you to obey, not disgrace. Harry. Sophia turned to her husband indignantly. The woman looked at her son and smiled dearly. What your father means is that you will have to get married without us. We won't be able to attend your wedding. Felix's eyes rounded in amazement. Not only did he have no desire to get married, but his parents would not be there on this beautiful day. Anger boiled up inside him. You don't have to worry. There will be no wedding. The boy blurted out. Harry, what is it? Scylla pounded the table with his fist. Sophia flinched at her husband's reaction and then almost cried herself. That was how much her son's statement struck her. Felix, sonny, what are you saying? Sophia said reverently, covering her son's hands with her own little warm palms. However, Felix threw an angry glance at his mother and snatched his hands from her embrace. I don't want to marry Moon. She disgusts me. Explained his words to the boy. I don't care if you want to or not. The father gritted his teeth. You are my son, and you will obey my will. If you don't want to lose that role, fine, then you're no longer my family. I'm leaving, just as rudely replied Felix. He abruptly got up from the table and went to pack his things. Felix, stop, shouted his mother after him. She was about to run after her son, but her hand was grabbed by Harry. Don't, darling. He has made his choice, and we must not interfere with it. Tears came to the mother's eyes. The woman didn't want it to turn out this way. Sophia wanted to avoid this conflict by any means necessary. But Harry had ruined it. Sophia didn't know. Whether it was the disease affecting him so negatively or his temper. Her George was a strict father. Sometimes he would say something very hurtful, but it was always the truth, and though it was hard for Sophia to admit it. But even now her husband was right. Felix had been born into their family, so he should have followed their traditions. But he's grown up now, and it's up to him to decide what he wants to do. The central idea of Taoism. Go with the flow and don't fight back. If Felix decided to go, let him go. The guy stuffed in his bag, into the car, aimlessly staggered around the neighborhood and reflected on what had happened. It seemed to him that the whole world suddenly turned against him. What injustice! Was it his fault that he was born into this family? Of course not. But they provided for him, gave him a good education. No, he owes them everything. Or should he go against his parents' wishes? Alex, I can sleep over tonight, said Felix into the phone receiver. No problem. Only then buy something to chew, answered the friend. The guy complied with the friend's request and lurked with a whole bag of different food. But at least it was lunchtime. His appetite was completely absent. He could not eat when so much had come upon him. Arriving at the right address, Felix went up to the floor and rang the doorbell, which fell off after a few seconds. "Come in." Felix invited his friend in. Alex's apartment was much more modest, but he rented it completely alone. No parents, no rules, no religion. Absolute and quiet solitude. The hallway was quite small, as well as the only room in the apartment. However, everything was very cozily arranged. Felix made his way into the room and sat down on the couch. The friend whirled around the apartment, closed the door, put the kettle on. "At night you will tell me what's the matter," unceremoniously asked Alex, sitting down opposite the friend. He was not distinguished by special neatness in conversations at once spoke in essence and directly to the face. On the one hand, it was a good trait. On the other hand, sometimes very offensive. Ask him, for example, how he liked his new jacket, and he would answer honestly, "It didn't look good." That couldn't help but offend. But better the bitter truth than a sweet lie. Yes, parents are a problem. Felix answered with a sigh. He always liked to start all conversations from afar to prepare the interlocutor for the future dialogue. He had inherited this trait from his mother. They told him to move out finally, Alex suggested, trying to make a joke. Felix was silent. He didn't know how to tell his friend about his worries. He and Alex had been friends since childhood. However, their paths diverged when the guys graduated from high school. Alex went to study to be a sound engineer and devoted his life to music. He did not have the same rich parents as Felix, and he achieved everything by his own labor. Felix went to university thanks to his parents' money, because he was smart enough, but not persistent enough in achieving his goal. No one ever set a goal for him to enter on the budget. They just paid for education, and that was the end of it. However, Felix decided on his future specialty himself and studied at the university with pleasure. "My father wants me to get married," sadly muttered Felix, lowering his head. "Why so sad?" "It's great," answered Alex. Laughter. Indeed, not understanding his friend's mood, he himself had no personal life. Alex devoted himself to his career and never thought about his family. He hadn't finished university yet, but he was already earning well, as fate gave him a job in a famous studio, where quite wealthy artists and bloggers recorded their albums and podcasts. It wasn't until later that Alex got it. Felix probably didn't think about getting married either. He had a steady business. The kid obviously didn't want to settle down so quickly. Now the expression on Alex's face became sympathetic. "To whom?" "Careful," asked Alex's friend. "That's the thing," sighed Felix. "On some village girl is depressed," he added. "That poor little villagers hardly touch your heart anymore." The boy tried to cheer up his friend with his jokes. "What's that got to do with it?" Felix got angry, as if coming out of a trance. "It's not even about social status. First of all, I don't want to have a wife right now. I wanted to rise up on my own first, not sit on my parents' neck. And secondly, would a girl like that make me happy? She's uneducated, unattractive, and hardly a good hostess." "So you've already met her, Alex?" "We were already engaged," shouted Felix. "My parents decided everything for me." "I didn't know that your ancestors want to marry you to Celiana," said Alex in bewilderment. "No, they just want my wife to be a girl of their faith, and they don't care if she will be a beauty or a native smart or not." I did not mention another circumstance ignored the last question of the friend. Felix gloomed. "My father is dying." "God." Alex stretched. "I sympathize." "He wants to see me married before he dies," continued the guy, "and unfortunately, for today found only this frosting." "Wait, what was it about her you didn't like so much?" "Lack of education." "Can you teach her?" "Beauty." "Can you change that too?" "I can't." Felix thought for a moment. "I just didn't think it would be so soon. So soon I'd live to see it. I'm not done yet. I haven't done anything, achieved anything. And they're already asking me to get married and have children. And anyway, you haven't seen her, Alex. It's something. I'm telling you." The guy said all his claims out loud and suddenly amazed himself. For a long time, he didn't understand what it was that repulsed him so much. And only now came the realization all too quickly. He was only 23 years old. Everything was supposed to be ahead of him. He wished he could take as his wife a woman he truly loved, with whom they would be soulmates. He didn't care what her faith was. She could be an atheist. He just wanted true, sincere love, not a marriage that was necessary to please his father. The guy felt like a serf who was forced to marry. "Tell me, Alex, what injustice is this?" After a long silence, asked Felix. "I understand that this girl is being married not so much for you as for money." "Well, of course," confirmed Felix sadly. "So let's not despair. I'll help you. I have a good plan. Maybe it will work," Alex declared. Felix, the Novostroika, had better move closer to his friend. He wanted to hear this brilliant plan. Alex had always had a knack for getting out of situations. Once at school, they threw a desk out of the window. Alex everything. So the principal and the teacher were to blame. However, that's another story. Having listened carefully to his friend's ingenious plan, Felix realized that he would do everything Alex came up with. It seemed like a really good way out. When the young man returned home the next day, his parents were already gone. They had left. Felix felt abandoned. Did he have the right to be here at all? After all, a day ago he declared that he did not want to have anything to do with this family. The guy decided to make a call alone to his mother. The phone rang. "Mom." Felix began. "What, son?" Gently but tiredly, the woman answered. "I'm sorry for everything I said this morning. I'm very ashamed of those words. I love you and your father, and I am ready to get married," the boy declared. Felix cried out excitedly to Sophia. Sounds could be heard in the phone. "I was so worried when you didn't show up. You'll have to forgive your father's rudeness." He did. By the way, as he interrupted the woman's son, "He's supposed to have surgery in 5 days. We're running some tests now." Okay. There was an awkward silence. Sophia was the first to break it. "Felix, we never got a chance to talk about the wedding because we're running out of time. We decided to have it in a week. As we said, my father and I will be absent, but morally we will be with you." "I understand. We are kind of indifferent," replied the son. He wasn't really interested in the details. His plan was a little different. They talked a little more about each other's well-being and said goodbye. Now Felix had to wait for the wedding day. The guy did not prepare for it at all. Unlike the bride, who was picking out jewelry and trying out her hair, her relatives were in charge of organizing the event. However, Felix's parents helped them financially. Felix himself continued to do business. He studied, and everything in his life flowed as it was before. Finally, the time of the appointed rite came. All this week, the guy felt terrible, conflicting emotions, but still took a plane ticket and flew to the event. He turned off his phone a couple days before the flight because he was mad at his father and did not want to listen to his last instructions. The wedding, as well as the engagement, took place in the same remote from civilization, sparsely populated village. To be more exact, near it there were endless fields, renewed with forest, where there was a temple Datsun, in which the marriage was to take place. The temple was small, but beautiful enough. A great many people came to the ceremony, mostly from the bride's side. The groom's parents didn't have that many friends or relatives, because those parents were either dead or had simply cut off all ties with their wealthy urban distant kin long ago. When Harry and Sophia had moved into town and started their own business, many of the distant relatives and friends had become jealous of them, and all communication with them had ceased, in and of itself. Felix drove up to the ceremony venue in a dirty old Shiguli. He managed with great difficulty to find such an ill-finished car and borrow it for one day from the local crew. Some guests were simply shocked at such an appearance. Though no, they weren't only astonished by it. When the guy entered the temple, a lot of surprised looks turned to him. All those present immediately began to whisper. Such a commotion was caused by the young man's appearance. After all, he clearly followed the plan made by Alex. The groom, contrary to the expectations of those gathered, came to the ceremony in the outfit of a bum. He wore a pink, torn, dirty t-shirt and beach shorts. The same kind of all this image was covered by a wrinkled blue jacket with red hearts, which was that he moved. He's wearing a lot of holy white sneakers, or rather, they'd been white once. The hair on his head was gathered into a short, sloppy ponytail. He bought the whole outfit at a flea market the day before his wedding. The guy had purposely chosen the lamest and weirdest clothes. It was very difficult. And the sellers looked at the foreign buyer with surprised eyes. How such a solid man who came to the market in a branded suit can buy such a thing? But all this was done for the sake of this very day, for the indignant looks, the guests, and their dissatisfied whispers. Some did not even hide their obvious displeasure at the appearance of the groom. Demonstrably, they got up and left the ceremony. One man even ventured to ask what this strange boy forgot in such a sacred place, to which Felix cheerfully answered him that he had come to get married. All this performance I watched inwardly laughing. Alex, the man who was the creator of this ingenious plan. When almost all the guests sat down and began to look at the groom with eyes full of anger and disappointment, the guy came forward and said, "Dear guests, I understand your angry looks, but the explanation for my appearance is very, very simple. My parents have gone bankrupt." Loud cheers started, heated discussions on the sidelines, and lively whispering. Among the guests, Felix looked victoriously at Alex. At last, this story was over. Yes, most likely, his parents will never forgive him for such a disgrace. But now he will really be free. But then suddenly the doors of the temple opened, and the chorus sang some unearthly angelic melody. The boy grinned at his bride, who was approaching him with her father's arm around her. Though she was covered by a traditional cape, she could surely see her fiancé's stunning outfit. Her accompanying father was simply enraged, but still continued to walk his daughter down the aisle. Probably he really needed the money, and they were willing to tolerate any attitude of the guy. But how could they sell their own daughter so horribly? Is she not dear to them at all? Thought even with some regret for the poor girl Felix. When they reached the priest, the father lowered his daughter's hand. Felix could not see her face, but suspected that she was horrified at what was happening. Finally, astonished as much as anyone, the priest took his religious paraphernalia, muttered something, and gestured Felix permission to throw back the bride's cloak. What did the boy do? Jesus, what was revealed to him? His impertinence. The milk instantly disappeared from his face, and an expression of utter shock and amazement froze on it. Right at him with pure, clear eyes, with eyes of incredible beauty, eyes in which you could drown forever and never regret it. A completely different girl was looking at him. Yes, it was not the dopey girl he had seen at his engagement party. This bride was simply enchanting. Beautiful brown curls fell over her graceful shoulders. Long, thick black lashes covered bright, glowing hazel eyes that shone from within. Her skin was snow white, thin and clear, like precious porcelain, and flawlessly pure. And those lips of theirs wanted to kiss Felix immediately, as if lightning had struck. He fell in love up to his ears and irrevocably. The guy never believed in love at first sight. After all, it meant that a person falls in love with the cover, not the content itself. But what he felt differently now was simply impossible to describe. And this most marvelous, most enchanting angelic face looked at him, a little frowning, frightened, sad eyes wounded Olenek. Only then did the boy suddenly realize how he now looked. God, like a circus performer. He felt very, very ashamed. In general, he could never even imagine that at the same time you can feel so many contradictory feelings. Felix felt so sorry for the girl who saw all this circus. He felt sorry for himself, pity for his unhappy parents. He was terribly angry now at Alex. Whoever had come up with this stupid performance was angry with himself. Why had he agreed to it? He realized with horror that he had no idea. What's this beautiful girl like now? She was almost sold under the pretext of the true faith, so even the groom turned out to be a complete idiot. And now she's definitely disgraced. The guy wanted to fall through the ground immediately. But on the other hand, did he know that there would be such a strange switch? Felix simply did not understand how it happened. His brain refused to work. Or was it the artificial makeup that had changed the girl so unrecognizably? Did he take another look at her? No, not at all. That's definitely not Moon. Where's Moon? Felix finally wondered aloud and looked at the girl's father. The one, it seems completely, and without two, lived the disgrace to which their entire family had just been subjected. To give his daughter in marriage to some crazy clown. Absolutely no respect for their faith. The father of the bride is just depressed. Silent turned a completely different color, and the mother answered instead. That is what Moon is. The young man hissed, and she, looking angrily at Felix, she was just skewered with anger. And if it hadn't been for the crowd of guests, she would have pounced on the bastard right now and smashed his face all over her bloody face. Are you saying I'm blind? It's definitely not Moon. The guy who didn't care who said or thought anything anymore was indignant. From anger, the girl's father clenched his fists and was about to hit this insolent man. But he was stopped by his wife. With a gesture, the man clenched his jaws and held back, and the woman clearly and without emotion said, "The one you saw, fool," was a common substitute. Did your parents not teach you our traditions? All the great gods know this. The groom must not see the bride before the wedding. At the engagement ceremony, they always show the switch, usually the worst girl they can find, so that the evil spirits will not envy the young people and spoil their wedding. But apparently, in your case, they still managed to do it. This is our present. Beautiful, smart, beloved, and our only daughter is the hope of the family and the hope of our whole community. The boy was simply stunned by the information he had just received. His mouth opened on its own, and his mind could not cope with the shock. He looked at the bride once more. It couldn't be. Wouldn't his parents have told him about this fact? Well, okay, his father, but his mother, she could have at least given him a hint of what to prepare for. But if he knew that the bride would be fake at the engagement party, and even on purpose, the worst part would have been easier for him to reconcile with his future fate. You really are their daughter. Decided to clarify the guy involuntarily guilty of this confusion. The girl only nodded, lowering her eyes modestly. It seems that her parents brought her up in the most rigid traditions. Realizing that not all is not yet lost, and the real Mon intended for him as a wife really unearthly. A beauty, the one he had just fallen madly in love with. Felix decided to come to his senses and get married after all. Of course, he was still completely unaware of what kind of person his future wife, but now he was completely indifferent. He only wanted her to be his wife as soon as possible. May I have your attention, please? He loudly announced to everyone present at this ceremony, despite our family circumstances. I am ready to keep my word and marry Moon. An unimaginable rumble rose in the hall again. Now everyone was discussing the groom's decision. Wasn't he planning to get married? Then why had they come here? What kind of circus was this today in such a holy place? You may continue. The boy turned to the priest, but he was gone. Where did he go? The boy wondered. What did he want at such a crucial moment? And just when Felix wanted to go to sort out the mess and find the escaped minister of heaven, he reappeared. You're having some kind of a jamboree instead of a sacred ceremony? I'm getting out of here right now. Besides, I just got a call from your worthless parents. Your father's on the mend. And they are breaking off this engagement with anger, the priest, who had taken off his ceremonial robes, declared. He jabbed his finger into Felix's chest. He muttered something unintelligible and ostentatiously left the temple, followed by all the others. Soon the hall was almost empty. The boy looked at the priest in total confusion, then looked at the girl and her parents. He had just found the love of his life, and everything was falling apart like a house of cards. It really was like a circus, and a bad one at that. Felix looked at his friend, hoping to get support, but he just shrugged his shoulders and made a perplexed face. This twist of fate was definitely not part of their beautiful plan. Well, come here. We're leaving, ordered the father of the bride. He did not look so strict at the engagement party, Felix noted to himself. The girl obediently turned and was about to follow her parents. But then Felix grabbed her arm. Looking directly into the eyes of the head of the family, the guy said decisively, "No, she is not going anywhere. I am the lawful groom, and my word is this. The wedding will take place today. Do you want it or not?" Young man, laughed the man. I don't understand you at all. I don't understand your whole family either. First, you come to a sacred ceremony dressed as a clown, insulting our faith and our clan, claiming your family is bankrupt and showing complete disregard for everything we hold dear. Then your father calls, says nothing of the ruin, but breaks off the engagement. And now you're back to claiming my daughter and threatening me. The engagement has been consummated, so you agree. Without blinking an eye, Felix parried. I will marry her, and that's final. It's your own fault, isn't it? You gave me some stupid switch. Don't you all realize that our generation doesn't care about all these religious prejudices? Of course, it wouldn't have been a circus if I'd seen the real one, but now I insist I have a legal right to your daughter. You practically sold her to me. What do you say? Not like this? How dare you, you bastard? The man hissed and hit Felix in the face with all his might. From a strong blow, the guy fell down and dropped his hand to his soulmate from his nose. He bled under the eye, blurred a large black eye. Yes, Amin cried out to the wife of the father of the family. Looks like they call everyone in their family by their Chinese names. Or is that some kind of switch too? Despite the pitch, Felix grinned to himself. He stood up, wiped the blood from his face with his sleeve, and returned the insufferable scoundrel's favor. The woman screamed, the daughter stood like a statue in her finery, and the few men present tried to break up the fight, but they were unsuccessful. Finally, Alex and another massive young local managed to do so, and they pulled the frustrated groom and father-in-law apart. What are you doing? Fool, spoke Alex quietly. Pardon God, not particles, cried out, ran back the priest, who heard the noise of fighting in the temple. To do such a thing in a holy place. You'll never attain enlightenment. You'll never know the path. Go away from here and never come back. And he spat under Felix's feet. He took the rosary and began to mutter something to himself quickly, apparently cursing the whole family of evil and his fiancée. Felix looked around. Only he and Alex were left in the temple room. The bride's family had disappeared as well. While the priest was covering him, Felix, shamed, all the guests had left as well. He had really messed up and had only himself to blame for everything. Yes, that was their cunning plan at first, to come in such a slovenly, unacceptable state, to say he couldn't see anything because his parents were broke. But things didn't go according to plan. When Felix saw his bride, he fell in love. There was no doubt about it. But now the relationship with her parents is ruined forever, as is the relationship with their priest. Plus the whole congregation, all the people who came. These are solemnizing events. Very disappointed and now unlikely to come to his wedding again. And will she even be in it? Felix was very doubtful. However, he was firmly convinced of one thing at all costs. Moon would be his wife. He was ready to steal her, kill for her, do anything to make her his. A murderous expression froze on Du Amin's round face. He had indeed wished someone dead so dishonored his daughter, his family, his religion. Who would take this tainted commodity as a wife now? And where else would he find another suitable groom? No, this Samsung and his family will not get away with this. They may be rich. They may have the right connections. But Amin has honor and dignity and his faith. And he will defend his daughter's honorable name and spare his family from such a terrible disgrace. The father resolutely dragged his late, quiet daughter behind him, who looked around with innocent eyes wet with tears. The mother walked beside them, showering curses on the rich and worthless family. As they left the temple, Felix rushed after them. Felix, stop. What are you doing again? Shouted after him Alex, trying to catch up with his friend. So they almost caught up with the remote. Yes, hearing their rapid stomping behind their backs, angrily turned around and his eyes blazed frantic. Fury, let's back off. We need to talk, Felix told him. The man told his family to wait for him here. They moved far enough away closer to the junction Felix had rented. Alex was also on alert to control the situation. If things go the same scenario as they did at the temple, what else do you want to talk about? Boyfriend? Amin asked sternly. You know very well what I want to marry your daughter, and I will do anything to get her. Well, can I congratulate you? You have already done everything so that my daughter herself will never come near you again. Do you really think she could marry the man who raised his hand against her father? The boy was ashamed. claiming Amin's daughter and beating him in front of everyone in the temple. He may have started it first, but let's face it, Felix fully deserved that slap. And if you think about it in their religion, it's not enough to kill for. Felix realized that his plan had failed and he had made a terrible mistake. Yes, Amin, I understand your indignation. But the guy started to apologize, but he was rudely interrupted. But do you really have any excuse for your behavior? The man started yelling. I didn't mean for it to come out this way. Please understand, you have deceived me. But the betrothed was a completely different girl, and you've already been explained well enough by the underdog. Why is that? Besides, you are utterly unworthy of mine. You don't know what duty is and love only the beauty of a man's outer shell. The whole point of our engagement is to see the inner beauty. But you won't understand why I'm trying. Felix shook his head in frustration. He wanted to just take it off his shoulders and shake it properly to put it in order. God, how much nonsense could he take today? Inner beauty? Is he serious? How can you see the inner beauty of one person in another? Yeah, but when did I have time to see the inner beauty? Moon, if I haven't even seen her once restrain himself as calmly as possible, he said to his opponent. According to your very logical tradition, I should see her rich spiritual world in another. That tradition, as you put it, is also yours. Whether you like it or not, Father Moon objected. If you remember, your parents raised you in the tradition. Dao caustically remarked to Da Amun. True, as I see it, they didn't succeed in that, he added. With bitterness. My parents forced me to get married. I didn't want to. I don't practice any Taoism. I'm a future scientist, and I don't care about all religion combined, exclaimed young Felix with all the fervor of a young man. The man felt so offended that his eyes almost fell out of his orbits. He looked at the impertinent boy and gritted his teeth, threatening him with his finger. You will never be my son-in-law. I will not allow it. You and your family disgust me. You broke our family and paid for it. I will never give you my daughter. Goodbye. With those words, the man turned and walked towards his family, leaving the two young men in a complete stupor. I don't get it now. He just said he wouldn't give me his daughter. Felix said slowly, What did he want, buddy? Alex was amazed. This is not a toy. And not always everything turns out the way we want. Disappointedly added the friend and went towards the car. Felix silently looked after him. He has not yet fully recovered from everything that happened today, and he was already offended by his friend, so he caught up with him and stopped him. Sanik, what are you doing? Surprised asked the groom. The friend looked at him disappointed. And you really do not understand? No, bro, explain. You think that because you were born into a rich family, you are allowed everything. Rich parents solve all your problems. You're used to getting everything you want. But you know, I can disappoint you. The world doesn't revolve around you. Shouted Alex. I've never heard you say that before, Alex. That's crazy, Felix. Are you jealous of me? Jealous of what, Felix? What you didn't get. It's the unwilling beauty, or that you insulted her father, beat him, and then you question and sincerely do not understand why he does not want to give you his daughter in marriage. You've got a lot of nerve, Felix. Not only have you shown no respect for your parents' request, but you think that after everything you've done here, you're going to be of any use to anyone. Wait a minute, you're the one blaming me for things that aren't my fault. I wanted to make fun of people like that, and I didn't beat up my father. I was only trying to help you, and you were a complete idiot. You came up with the plan, asshole. You helped me pay it off, and now you're renegotiating liability. That plan certainly didn't include fighting and insulting your fiancé's parents. Yeah, you want to know why it went so wrong. Felix raised his voice even higher. I fell in love with her as soon as I saw her. Yeah, Sonia, I fell in love with that girl. You're out of your mind. What love? Damien said it right. You just want a pretty doll. Love. Felix is a job, not one lustful look at a scared girl. She could be Angelina Jolie. But that's not love. Fool. Fuck you. You're not my friend anymore. Felix has declared. I don't want to be friends with shit like you and Felix. I hope we never cross paths again. Goodbye. And Alex left too. This got in place. This day was supposed to be the happiest day of Felix's life, but it was the exact opposite. Now he hated this day himself and his parents. That Danfield and that stupid temple. Why? Why didn't they tell him? For the 100th time? He asked himself, as if mocking him. More torrential rain came down. Felix cursed the whole world. Why did he have to suffer such a universal injustice? He had been abandoned by all the friends of the bride's parents for sure and his parents. Judging by the 15 missed calls, the guy didn't want to answer at all. They would now be heaping accusations, swearing and sending the same curses as the priest and Father Moon, even though they themselves had a hand in the whole shebang. To announce that they had changed their minds when the son was already holding his Narayan's hand. What nonsense is this? Did they really think in hindsight that this was how they were saving him? Felix kicked a huge stone with his foot in terrible frustration and howled in pain. The beautiful face, the real Moonwoo, flashed before his eyes again. He would always remember that look of confusion and interest. He sat down and his near Magoo, picked up on the road, walked far ahead. Alex told him not to turn on the fool and at least get back with him together. The next day, they flew safely to their hometown and went in different directions for the whole way back, once chatty as 40. Alex didn't utter half a word. Felix sat on his soul as well. His parents had called so many times that he just turned his phone off. Maybe they had already arrived. However, entering the apartment, he realized that this was not the case. There was no one at home. Everything remained in the same place. And only at your without watering flowers reminded reproachfully of his tender mother. He'd forgotten to leave his neighbor the keys. How is Mom there? She must be terribly worried. Felix dared to call her and find out the details of his and his father's motivation that had led to such monstrous consequences. Yes, answered his mother's sleepy voice. It's you, Felix. Great gods, where have you been? Sorry, Mom, apologized the boy. I saw that you called me many times, but I couldn't answer. The mother tried to say something, but Felix interrupted her mom. The priest interrupted the wedding after you called. Tell me, why did your father do that? Your father is on the mend and no longer wants to marry you to that beggar girl. Now we have time again, and we can find you a better bride. No, Mom, the son replied firmly. That's not the way things are done. You forced me to get married, and then suddenly you decide to end it all. You're playing on other people's feelings. Imagine how your parents felt. They couldn't bear the embarrassment. You become too concerned with their feelings. Son, the mother said grudgingly. 2 days ago, you didn't even want to get married. Things have changed. Mom is Moon. She should be mine. Oh, son, how can I trust you young men after that? I'm not getting married today. Tomorrow, the love of my life. So you'll do as your father says. Now, obviously, you're too young to decide for yourself, right? Okay, let's talk about it later. But Mom, well, she's already hung up on Felix. For the umpteenth time in the past few days, he felt disappointed in his once respected parents. He was really hurt that his mother didn't understand him. Not even because she and his father had conditioned him and almost threatened him. He just stopped understanding anything about their motives and their actions. They talked him so hard into getting married, and now they didn't want him to. The hell of it. The guy flopped down on the couch and covered his face with his hands. He didn't understand what to do next, how to live. His friend had turned away from him. His family is against him, and his fiancée's parents don't want to know him anymore. Felix incessantly thought about how he could reunite with his beloved, once again apologize, get on his knees and beg for forgiveness. That was unlikely to fly. Try talking to Moon herself. That's a good idea. At the ceremony, Felix thought she looked at him with interest. But then again, she probably looked at everyone that way. But he had to be sure. Suddenly, the girl will reciprocate his feelings. But how to put this plan into action? After all, if he comes to their house through the front door, so to speak, he will obviously not be particularly welcome. But Felix decided to take a chance. The airline should already include me in the list of VIP clients. With a smirk, thought he ordered another ticket, that already painfully familiar flight. Now it was necessary to prepare properly for the meeting with his beloved. The guy rushed to the shopping center, bought himself a new soup basket, delicacies, sweets, and expensive perfume for men, and various other pleasant little things. Now there were only flowers left. He didn't go to his network. He didn't want his parents to know about his movements. It would be another round of annoying phone calls. Why? 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 Oh, what a nightmare. Father's will is our family religion, the way of the Tao. Damn it. He's had enough. You want bouquets of rainbow roses for all this? Smiling politely, the girl at the flower shop asked. Yes, that's right. Felix answered cheerfully. Rainbow ones were considered the most beautiful, rare, and prestigious. Felix hoped that Moon would appreciate the gift. The cashier pulled out a card machine. Applying, please, she said, adjusting the flowers in the bouquet. The guy applied the card, but an unpleasant squeak followed. The girl looked at him questioningly. It didn't work. There must be some mistake. Let's try again, she suggested. She pressed some buttons on the machine. Felix applied the card again, and again there was that awful beeping sound. The clerk looked at the terminal, then at the guy. It looks like your card is not working, the girl said. No way. I used it a couple minutes ago at the candy store. It worked. The young man protested. Young man, I don't know what happened to your card, but you better check it out. We're hosting, no problems. I just served a customer, and everything went well, muttered the disgruntled saleswoman, putting the bouquet of roses back in the glass display case. The guy could not understand why it happened. After all, only a few minutes ago, and then it came to him. He'd had his accounts frozen, and it was none other than his own father. That's how he showed his love for his own. One son, Felix started frantically dialing his mother's number. He says he had no desire to talk to his father. But unfortunately, it was the father who answered the phone. That Daddy's money had run out, Harry quipped. He'd frozen the accounts for something. In a calm tone, without giving in to provocation, Felix asked, Aren't you getting cocky, son? So you think you can just not answer the phone and spend all my money? It was only when I decided to block the card that you finally bothered to call. Your money is my money too. Wasn't I working for the greater good? And the whole time you were in the hospital, I was the one working day and night for our business. Felix walked out of the flower store so as not to embarrass the cashier, who was already starting to get frightened by his loud talking and was looking at him with a concerned look. Dear Felix, none of this is our business. It is mine alone, my father declared. I am very grateful to you for choosing to support me in a difficult situation. But I'm on the mend, which means I don't need your help anymore. Then why do you need it at all? I yelled in rage at the guy. To endlessly manipulate me like an obedient puppet. You are my son and heir. Yes, perhaps. Right now, you're too young to realize how life works. But the time will come when you will understand and change your mind. In the meantime, it's my duty as a father to guide and restrain your irrational impulses. Well, the father put Felix at the end of this discussion, realizing that it will not achieve anything and need to act more cunningly. I am ready to obey you. I see you're talking better. Your cough is almost gone. Did the operation help you? The boy asked me affectionately. Yes, son, thank the doctor. Harry said, but don't think that's how you're going to put me off my guard. Listen to me carefully. You will not go near that family again under any circumstances. Do you understand? If you listen to me, we're all in big trouble. It's not about me or our religion anymore. You have foolishly insulted your father and his entire family. He won't let it go. I take it you two have known each other a long time. Careful, asked Felix. He has been my friend since childhood. Answered the father. That's why I wanted you to marry his little girl. But then Harry paused. Circumstances have changed. I'm better now, and we don't need to rush into a wedding. We'll look for another good match for you later, like you wanted. But I love this girl. Felix cried out in despair. You don't even know her. Father said calmly, and that's the end of it. And my card? The boy tried to make a last attempt. But his father, as well as his mother, before that without further words gave the rebuff. Felix understood very well that now that he was left without funds, it would be much harder for him to carry out his plan to conquer Moon. But despair is not the style of a hot young man. He threw himself into searching drawers, closets, and closet. An hour later, he had already racked up $10.50. Knowing his father's habit of stashing things everywhere, Harry had forgotten that Felix was like him in terms of business qualities. So if he could get out of the situation with a blocked account, he thought feverishly, it would be enough for the first time. At least he had time to buy a ticket. After he cashed in the money from his stock exchange transactions, there should also be some money saved up. With all the determination of a lover, Felix quickly packed his travel bag, hailed a cab, and rushed to the airport. He intended to find and persuade her to run away with him. The fact that the girl might not be willing to give up everything for him. He didn't take it into account. When the next day he was again on the same loop, among the age-old cottonwood cedars, the roads were already thickening with the quick autumn twilight. This time Felix rented a sturdy and roomy SUV, and with much more comfort overcame the disgusting highway to the village itself. He braked in some thick bushes and hid the Jeep in them, driving almost into the bush and already on foot, and lightly began to sneak roundabout to the house of the parents of his adored Moon. Now the sun had almost set from behind the tops of the tall trees. Only the faintest of flowers were visible, and the sunset in the sky revealed itself in all its grandeur. Suddenly, as soon as he stepped out into the open, a truly futuristic and disturbing picture unfolded, retiring into the open. The sun was just a huge, bright scarlet color, and Felix rubbed his eyes in amazement, trying to make sure that this landscape he was seeing for real. It seemed to be drowning in the murky or a few spun in the distance above the dark band of distant forest of their clouds and looked. So fading away a bright corner and higher up on the vast, never to be seen. In the big city, heavenly expanse evict mountains of blue and golden clouds. They spit fractions at each other, breaking and melting like a giant kaleidoscope. Changing the inimitable surreal action over and over again on the guy's heart became unsettling. Even creepy. It suddenly seemed to him that here is not that familiar land, not that planet, which he considers his own, but an unknown and threatening world, where you should not go without special need. Felix, as mesmerized, stood for a few minutes, gazing into the frightening sky, and then shook his head of fear and obsession, and resolutely strode into the village. All he took with him was a small backpack that contained a bottle of water, a folding knife, a flashlight, a bag of chips. The hike took longer than the guy had anticipated. He walked to the right house for about 20 minutes. The village was much bigger than he had first thought. Felix moved cautiously. Every now and then, looking around, he feared to meet Ammon or someone else from his clan who could bring him news. Some of the huts looked like dilapidated ruins, while others were quite respectable buildings. There were hardly any people to be seen. There were no electric lights on the streets either. Soon he would probably need a flashlight to make out the road in the increasingly thickening net. Felix passed the village almost through. Already some sort of wide field was visible, and the round roof of the Datsun, where the recent failed ceremony had taken place. The boy realized that he was lost. He knocked randomly at 6. At the first wicket, Philly prepared to wait for a long time for the owner to come out to ask for directions, and he was immediately sent away by surprise. When a short figure behind the hedge rose almost from the ground and said hoarsely, "What do you want, honored one? Can you tell me which way the house is?" He asked the frowning grandfather, who looked at the stranger with obvious dislike. "What do you need him for?" grumbled the grandfather. "I need to deliver a package to him." Felix lied, pointing to his backpack. The old man looked at the young man incredulously, raised his eyebrows, as if amazed at his idiocy, and silently pointed with his hand to the right to the end of the press in the forest dead end, and then go left. "They live on the very outskirts." Felix thanked the old man and turned around. It was to go on, but he was stopped again by a fiddling old man's voice. "I wouldn't go to them if I were you, especially now." The grandfather snapped. "Yes, thank you," Felix mumbled softly and hurried away. If he could have seen what the old man did afterwards, he wouldn't have been so optimistic. He opened a cigarette, threw it on the ground, and shouted something harsh in his own language. From the hut jumped out a boy of about 9 years old, narrow-eyed on the rocks in a tracksuit, and having listened to Didov's admonitions about the rightness, rushed in the same direction as the stranger dead Archil who had left, fierce in his face. He shook his head disapprovingly, and his eyes gleamed in the moonlight with an almost bestial eerie fire. But Felix neither saw nor knew any of this, and after 10 minutes of quick hell found himself at a familiar house collapsed, standing and dark. Not a single window glowed in the night, and our hero huffed. Everyone was already asleep, or no one was home, he decided. But he needed this girl. He wanted to make her his wife by all means, which meant trying everything, all options. He pushed the dilapidated gate, and it opened easily with an unpleasant creak to slip into the yard. Felix tried the same thing with the door of the house, and again it was unlocked. With a sinking heart, he squeezed inside and listened. There was a sepulchral silence. Carefully, he fumbled for a flashlight in his pocket and turned it on without taking it out. The resulting dim light showed him that the first floor was empty and unoccupied. The furnace was cold, and no sign of the owner's presence. Felix hesitated for a moment, walked the same way to the second floor, stopping at every creak and rustle. But even here he found nothing new. The house looked as if no one had lived here for a long time. The disappointed lover walked back into the courtyard and immediately stopped like a stumbling block. In the brightly lit warm electric light, the window of the neighboring mansion, Moon's profile clearly emerged. The guy, like a moth with eyes burning with passion, began to circle the yard, looking for a way to get to the cherished window. The opportunity was found in a couple of minutes. Seeing Kynes, the net separating neighboring plots in one place tore, forming a large gash river, regardless of the damage to his expensive clothes. Felix squeezed through this uneven hole and found himself in the well-maintained, well-lighted garden street lamps of someone else's yard. Noticing some movement nearby, he immediately ducked into the bushes, trying to recognize the paying heart, and almost laughed out loud when a big fat cat walked past him importantly. The cat went on a night hunt, smiled the guy, and slowly got out of hiding like a thief, making his way almost to the ground. He took the yard to the cherished window. And here it is, the goal is already close. On the second floor of the mansion, the beautiful Moon brushed her dark curls. Sitting by a large Triumph, Felix watched her like a maniac from behind the lush rose bushes for his luck. A little to the right of Moon's window, some low outbuilding was visible. It wasn't too hard to climb to the roof, just as long as there were no dogs here. Felix prayed to himself. Further along the wall was a rather rugged-looking Liang village with thick, sturdy chain-link victories for one, then another. The boy, surprisingly, climbed up quite easily. The girl at the mirror heard a strange sound, became alert, and turned her head toward the window, which was open for airing. Felix froze, frightened by her sudden movement, but immediately realized that there was no point in hiding. After all, he had come to talk to her, and this was his chance. Pulled up a little more, he knocked quietly on the window. The girl picked up some object from the table, slipped it into a pocket in her homemade pajamas. God, she looked so seductive in them, and walked cautiously to the window. Moon said timidly to the boy, "Open up, please. Don't be afraid. It's me, Felix, your fiancé." Her face changed. From worried, it became cheerful and lively, and Felix thought it was a good sign. "Hello," he said, her ridiculously smiling all over her mouth. The girl quietly jumped in her fist. It was too anecdotal a sight, clinging still to the escapes, the shadows, and Shock's wife, absent-mindedly in an expensive suit, drooled, looking at her like a hungry puppy at a bowl of food. "What wind brought you here?" Moon grinned, eyeing her bow. The boy heard her voice for the first time. It rang like a crystal bell. He had one of those. He had gotten it for New Year's Eve as a child and treasured it terribly then. "I've come for you. I want you to run away with me," Felix declared. The girl laughed ringingly and even clapped her hands. "Bravo, bravo. I haven't been so amused in a long time." She wiped the corners of her prominent eyes with the back of her pink palm. She couldn't help laughing. "You made me cry," she told him at last. "That's bad." Disarming, smiled Felix. Smiled beautifully, but completely useless. Why? raising his eyebrows in a house, upset Felix, like a child whose toy has been taken away. A sprout. Contemptuously threw it behind and poked. Are you completely retarded or just successfully pretending? But Moon tried was sluggishly expressed the guy. What? What can you say to me? She interrupted him. That you fell in love and lost your mind? Blah, 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 blah. Do you have any idea how many times I've heard that kind of nonsense? Get out, she finished her harsh tirade and was about to close the window. No, please, darling, after listening to me. Felix pleaded. Aren't we destined for each other by fate itself? After all, a couple of days ago you were going to marry me in obedience to your father's will. That was a couple days ago. I shrugged. It seemed like a favorable idea to my ancestors at the time. I've heard of marriages of convenience, but you chagrined. You put on a terrific show, failed miserably. You're definitely not a clown. If not, you need to seriously consider a circus career. I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking. Felix started again, but this time she didn't let him finish. You don't have to be born. I understood everything perfectly well back then. Thank you especially for that funny show. But now my whole family hates you and your ancestors. I forgive you this time because you managed to make me laugh again. But if you stick your nose in here one more time, the girl concluded with a clear threat in her voice, you'll regret it. And you know how to push the pain. Admitted Felix and put his hand on the sash of the window so that she did not close it. And what do you hate me to? He tried to ask, looking into her eyes. I have no reason to feel any particular hatred for you. The beauty answered indifferently. You haven't done anything bad to me. On the contrary, you've cheered me up. And you've freed me from something I never wanted to do. So you didn't want to marry me, the boy summed up. Wistfully, lowering his head. One would think you were going to get married. He glared. But when I saw you, I realized I loved you. I fell in love with you. Fell in love at first sight desperately and hurriedly uttered Felix belittlingly, looking at the object of his passion. Please, let's avoid it. I earn well and will be able to provide for you perfectly. I'll make you happy, I promise. The girl looked at him carefully. Promise? Yes, yes. Felix nodded happily, sensing a breach in her defenses. Then you must pass the test. Solemnly, Moon said. The boy was taken aback. What test? He felt involuntary anxiety again. Everything that was going on already clearly smelled of magical scary fairy tales. Unreal landscapes, a remote village. He climbed into a tower with a beautiful woman. Like Rapunzel, and now there's some kind of challenge. I'd do anything for you. He muffled the timid signal of his common sense with a decisive phrase. Good. Moon smiled and squinted slyly. Then, no sooner had she finished this sentence than downstairs there was heard some strange sound at the trumpet growling or grunting. It certainly did not look like a dog. But Felix counted to 3 and cautiously looked down. When he saw what was below, he felt a seizure on you. It was a tiger, a very real bloody tiger, walking freely around the precinct like a circus arena. Moon. Nasty for giggling. Well, then let's meet my striped friend. First, don't bother, she said affectionately to Felix, who darted his eyes at her wildly, unable to say anything. I'll give you a good head start. She leaned out of the window and shouted down something like know-how. Felix nervously saw that the predator raised his muzzle, looked at his mistress and poked something, like a big cat gracefully and with a gate removed. Away too, exhaled the guy, feeling the prickly goosebumps crumble from his head to his feet. Don't relax, laughed the cruel Moon. You only have about 5 minutes to 7. Run. Suddenly she shouted and poked Felix in the chest with her thin finger, sharp, long, dark red tights on the end. At that he thought her eyes glittered predatorily. But at that moment he did not have time to register it in his memory, because from the surprise he let go of the tree shoot and fell down on the very edge of the roof of the annex and hit his whole body painfully. And Moon was upstairs having fun. Run, you idiot. Felix somehow got up, looked away with a poisoned gaze, and rashly rushed across the lawn to the hole. All the dacha fence from there was already completely dirty and stripped. He ran down the street, unable to feel his feet under him. He could still hear Moon's distant, hysterical, laid-back laughter. Now her voice no longer seemed to him a gentle crystal bell. So he ran for what seemed to him a very long time, until Felix, powerless in his chest, and hot and aching, squatted down and tried to get some water from his backpack. But it was better he didn't. The approaching menacing roar suddenly announced the neighborhood, and the hapless knight almost crapped his pants from fear, threw his bat and set such a catch that his institute instructor on military training would be extremely amazed if he saw now this undoubted running record. Feeling no longer in a fairy tale. To hell with such fairy tales put together. But as if on the set of a bad horror movie, Felix ran away with huge jumps, not seeing the road, and behind him inexorably catches up with a very real tiger. There were no more thoughts in the shoe's head. Only the pounding in his temples was to live. Live, please live. He himself did not know to whom exactly this desperate plea was addressed. Maybe even to the hunt, to the bald devil himself. He didn't care at all anymore. This maddening chase was stopped by the county lord, Chensha's know-how. The tiger stopped like a halt, yawned lazily and pinned his ears and walked, wagging his tail at that stern voice. Felix stopped too, breathing heavily, bulging his eyes and gulping hot air with his mouth. A fire was burning inside him, and he couldn't feel his legs. "Don't be afraid, he's just a little fool," said someone on the sidelines. Where Tiger went, come here. Felix closed his eyes forcefully, squeezed his temples, and looked into the distance again, trying to focus on someone's figure looming. In the dim light of a tall lantern pole, there was something like a sign hanging on the pole to make out what was scrawled on it. But he didn't even try. But oh well, the guy thought, and got ready to run onto his car. It was true that he hadn't passed this part of the village when he was heading here. But that didn't matter at all. The main thing was to get out of the Stan area and get to some safe civilization. And then he saw Mona coming toward him again. No, not the Moon who had just poisoned a wild beast on him, but the other Moon he'd seen at the engagement party? Or was she not Moon? No, definitely that Moon has a different name, I guess. What's the difference? Felix's thoughts were racing, and confused his hands were shaking and his mouth was dry. He approached. With regret and even slight contempt, looked at the guy. "Come with me," decisively she said, and pulled him by the sleeve. "Where to? Why?" Still not having fully recovered his breath, Felix tried to object. "This way." She dragged him to the door under the lantern and slammed it shut in front of him. The room behind the door turned out to be something like an inn. There was loud modern music from the bartender, or as he was called here, wiping glasses with a not-so-clean towel. A few people were drinking at low wooden tables. A small group was playing backgammon. When they piled inside, no one even looked up. The girl confidently turned into some dark corridor and signaled Felix to follow her. However, he decided to be stubborn and find out what other adventure they were trying to pull him into. "Where are you taking me?" he said more sensibly. She turned around, frowned slightly, gave him an appraising look from head to toe, and grinned at the tiger. "Or do you want to go back to keep competing with him in the running?" No, he hastened to assure her and obediently dragged her up another of the same creaking pile of wooden stairs. It looked a little better than that, though, as she staggered under his weight in her parents' abandoned house and found herself in a small room that looked a lot like a hotel room. Felix looked around. Yes, it clearly looked like a hotel. The girl who had saved him from the tiger nudged him casually through the door of the tiny bathroom. "Clean yourself up. I'll be right back." She stepped out and appeared to lock the door. But Felix was glad of that now. Anything was better than being rushed in the dark by a horrible monster ready to devour you. He shuddered again at the memory of his recent mortal danger. He showered with pleasure, screaming and turning under the hot jets. Name wiped himself with a clean towel, and finding a bathrobe here and there, threw it on. He had nothing else to wear. What had recently been an expensive Italian tracksuit was now a pitiful rags. When he went back into the room, he found that Moon had already returned with a large tray of food. The boy himself didn't realize exactly what he had eaten, but it was surprisingly delicious. Satiated, he finally got a chance to get a proper look at his savior. Of course, she was far from the beautiful Moon, But she wasn't at all dull either, as he'd thought she was at the engagement party. The ugly warts were gone. Her face was smooth, her skin even, and her eyes were no longer like narrow slits. I think the eyes were actually quite nice. "What are you?" "Ridiculous," he asked her. She smiled. "I'm Kate." At least one normal name in this theater of the absurd. Felix thought involuntarily and smiled back. "Thank you, Kate. You saved me from this." He twitched again, like a tiger's toothache. "Absolutely harmless," the girl assured him. "No more so than its namesake from the Winnie the Pooh cartoon, remember? It's where the tiger is always jumping on his tail and annoys everyone with his impenetrable stupidity." Felix laughed animatedly. "Yes, it's my favorite cartoon. I just adored it as a child." He smiled warmly, remembering how many cozy evenings he spent in the company of his own mother with a cup of hot cocoa, Melu, and this very cartoon. But you know, this local predator. If it hadn't been for you, a shadow would have come over his face again. "I'm telling you patiently, like a little kid," Kate Tigra explained. "The cub is still a silly little baby. He runs after everyone like a puppy. All he wants to do is play." But Moon ordered him in a disbelieving tone. Felix objected. "He's just a spoiled asshole." Kate grinned. "She laughed at you. That's all. And where is that beast now?" Cautiously inquired the boy, taking the information to heart. "Well, walking home, I guess." Kate shrugged. "Everyone knows him here, and he knows everyone. He lives in his menagerie. That's where he was born. He's as shy as a bologna, really." "I have a menagerie?" Felix asked incredulously. "They have a lot of things." Kate grinned again. "They're the local rich." And she laughed at her own joke. "But for engagements," Felix continued, puzzled. "They've just cheated you out of your engagement," the girl told him. "This is the lodge." "Where have you been?" "The old house of their 100-year-old grandmother. But even she doesn't live in it anymore. Your parents haven't been here for a long time and don't seem to realize how things are back home now." She was silent for a moment and then squinted slyly. "Do you remember me somehow?" The boy muttered unhappily. "Yes," Kate agreed, "but don't take offense. That's the way it is around here. I was asked to help. So I did." "Who asked you?" "My father. He's the owner of this inn. There wasn't another girl in the whole village as old as Moon and me." "What was all that for?" Felix asked indifferently in a tired voice. "I'm telling you, it's a custom among these fanatics not to jinx them. The bride before the wedding show a substitute, trying to choose the most horrible homeland." "I did a good job, really," said Kate with a laugh. "Yeah," Felix shook his head. "I fell for that fucking circus, and it turned out the way it did." He grudgingly blurted out. He realized a second later that it sounded very rude, but Kate didn't seem the least bit offended. "I'm sorry, I'm such a fool," the boy apologized hastily. "It's okay, I did my best to." The girl held out her hand to him. "Let's take it," she said, like a kid. Felix liked this unexpected offer. He liked it very much. "Let's." He smirked and gently shook her small, warm palm. Suddenly he felt uncomfortable, and he hurriedly removed his hand and moved the conversation to another topic. "How much is the room here?" $500 per night. "But I can give you a discount." Kate smiled. "Thank you. No need." Felix replied dryly and carelessly threw the $5,000 bills on the table. "Keep the change. Leave a tip. That's how it is for the city's rich," Kate said resentfully and muffled. "Thank you," she smiled politely and looked at him with an overly formal smile. "Breakfast is from 8 to 11, and you can choose and pay at the cashier's desk." She headed for the door. "If you need anything, please contact the receptionist." Slammed the door and walked out, throwing the key on the table. Now Felix was truly ashamed. You could say, his life was saved, and he other things. However, fatigue took over, and soon the hapless knight already slept the sleep of a baby. Cozy on fresh sheets, clean and simple bed. The morning met Felix with such bright sunlight that he, barely opening his eyes, immediately closed them. Appeared, but the next minute he laughed joyfully, jumped out of bed, and went to the bathroom to shine. Properly, he got out thoroughly. Satisfied, he looked himself over in the mirror and winked at his mirror double. thought that life wasn't as bad as it had seemed to him on last night's sullen evening. The beginning of the day left no chance to almost mystical horror, which haunted the guy the day before. Now to himself, everything that had happened seemed to him only a funny joke, nothing more. Why was he so afraid of that tiger cub? It was embarrassing. Now the cute image in front of Moon's face resurfaced in his memory. Here she is looking in the mirror, brushing her gorgeous curls. Here she is smiling, looking into his eyes. Here's an infectious chuckle informing him of the ordeal. But why? Why is he such an impenetrable fool? Determined to try his luck again today, Felix came out of the bathroom, and then he suddenly realized an obvious but unpleasant truth. He had nothing to wear. Yesterday's fashionable outfit was in the trash. He would die prematurely, first from the collision with the net, and then from the nightmare chase. The guy frowned and lingered. But at least the robe was in place. Leaving it behind, he strode proudly down the stairs, completely unaware of what time it might be now. Your phone charger was left in the car, and there was no clock in the room. Reaching the front desk, the bar, he found Kate there, busily writing something down in the big journal. When she saw him, she made a serious and impenetrable face and asked him if he needed anything. Breakfast is still an hour away. Kate, please don't be angry. Don't be angry. He corrected himself when he met her aloof gaze. I wasn't myself last night. I said some nonsense and didn't even thank you for your help. I'm ashamed, aren't I? He folded his hands in a pleading gesture and looked at the girl with the most night eyes he could muster. Okay, accepted. Her gaze softened. She smiled and was herself again. Come on, Kate. I'll look for some clothes for you. Before Felix could reply half a word, she had already gone somewhere and returned, carrying a neat package. I think this will do. The guy thanked his savior and, clutching the handout to his chest, went upstairs. It turned out to be no big deal. A t-shirt 2 sizes bigger than it needed to be, and clearly not 1 year's wear, and 3 books. But there was no need to choose. Felix hadn't brought any spare outerwear. Pulled on his duffel, our hero went downstairs again. He involuntarily admired. Now she was joyfully humming, rubbing, and to the mirror shine all around and twirled. Like Cinderella sweeping the floor with a tall brush, Felix, she did not notice at once, and for a minute or two he stood on the stairs, smiling and looking at her slender figure, which in the bright morning light, penetrating through 2 large windows, seemed almost transparent and fragile, like a dandelion, fluffy, short hair sparkling in the sunlight, flashed golden sparks, and a simple brown dress seemed the outfit of a princess. When she finally saw that she was being watched, she was embarrassed for a few seconds, lowered her head, and ran off with her mop loudly. Felix walked over to the counter, trying to look serious, but his lips kept stretching into a cheerful smile of their own. Waiting for her to return, he said, Kate, you were dancing like Cinderella just now. You're doing great, she smiled and looked at him trustingly and easily. Only now in the bright daylight that strips away all the masks from people. He noticed that her whole face was studded with little redheads, freckles, and even her deep brown eyes, all in pretty, bright, certain dots. It was so unexpected and so cute that Felix suddenly thought that she was just as good as Mona. However, he immediately chased that thought away from him. Can I invite you to breakfast? He asked Kate, wanting to repay her for last night's favor. Would I? The girl agreed. I've already eaten, but I'd love to have coffee with you. What time does she get up? Felix thought. Stepping behind her into the room where breakfast was served for food, which turned out to be both hearty and delicious. They chatted merrily, joking around, and walked back to the counter. At the entrance, completely satisfied with each other. Well, I'll go, said goodbye to the girl Felix, taking his bag from the room. I'll try my luck again. Are you going to Moon more seriously? Kate asked. Yes, he nodded. I'm still hoping she'll change her mind and marry me. Oh well, good luck to you. Kate said dryly and leaned over her magazine. Felix came out looking like a morning flake and moved with a quick step towards the Moon house. If he could see what Kate was doing now, he would probably be very surprised. She was still sitting there with her head down on her hands and her thin shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Dear Amin, I love your daughter with all my soul. I sincerely apologize to you, to your entire family, to your gods, if I may." Felix stood at the open door of the house, and for a good 10 minutes he had already been ranting in front of its head. And behind his back, but satisfied, Amin felt sluggishly and looked at the impudent man with less disapproval. Finally, with a gesture, ordered the boy to shut up the guy. "If you really have such a crush on my moon, you'll have to prove your loyalty to us." "I'm willing to do anything you say," Felix exclaimed enthusiastically. "However, do not lose sight of the immediate neighborhood. Kate said they have a whole menagerie here." "Then come here tonight." Amin nodded satisfactorily. "Once you pass the test, you'll be able to get a wife. Unless, of course, you don't ask," as yesterday, with a clear grin, the man added. "But everyone now get out of here. I haven't even had breakfast yet, and I have to listen to you. I'm sick of your speeches." He waved his hand again, which was apparently meant to mean, "The audience is over." "What time did you turn around?" asked the pushy boy. "What time should I be there when the sun comes up?" shrugged Emin. "Don't you know that evening comes just when the daylight retires?" And he grunted as he closed the door. Felix hurried away before the tiger appeared again, though he was assured that this animal was as tame and docile as a house cat. But he did not want to meet it again. He was encouraged by an almost peaceful conversation and a business proposal of his future father-in-law. The lad walked briskly back to the hotel. "It's all right. If I could stay with you for a while longer," he asked Kate. She just shrugged. "We have plenty of rooms available. It's not tourist season. Besides, you left a substantial deposit." Felix got his key back and went to retrieve the rented Jeep from the thicket. This time he drove through the village with a breeze, and no tigers were no longer afraid of him. He spent the rest of the day on pins and needles and could not wait for the evening. He ate twice, had a few drinks for courage, and even played a game of backgammon with 2 of the regulars. The sun was still not going down, and yet the day was steadily drawing to a close. And now the long-awaited twilight. As if waiting for this very moment, the phone rang shrilly in the hall. It was picked up by a middle-aged lady who was now sitting behind the counter instead of Kate. "Who do you want? Sounds like it's for you." She handed the receiver to Felix, wondering who could be calling him here. He put it to his ear and heard his mother's concerned voice. "Felix, thank God. Listen to me. I have something very important to tell you." She began to speak as hurriedly as if she were being chased. "Son, please wait there for me, and don't you hear me? Don't you go anywhere out of this hotel." Your father's phone clicked, and the connection went dead. Shrugging his shoulders, Felix pressed the lever and picked up his backpack, which he had found this morning on the side of the road. There they go again. Disliked, the guy thought grudgingly. How annoying. Coming out of the hotel door, he almost head-on collided with Katya. "Where did you go again at night?" she asked him glumly. "It's a long explanation." He waved her away impatiently. "Let's do it later. Please be careful." She touched his hand and looked carefully into his eyes. "If you're going for the money again." "Bye, Kate." He twisted away and walked away to his car with a quick step, irritated at the thought that this was where she was teaching him the same thing. "And you're the one who went out on the phone and looked indifferent. We didn't forget." "Well, wait here until everyone gathers." With these words, he slammed the wicket right in front of the guy's nose and lazily fell over. Wandered down the powerful path to the house. Where should he wait? Who should he wait for? No one was in a hurry to answer these questions. They stomped around for a while. Felix sat back in the car and waited. What else could he do? About an hour passed. The guy had already managed to doze off comfortably on the seat, as suddenly there was a knock on the glass. When he woke up, he saw in the darkness some dark silhouettes in long clothes. There were quite a few of them, and they were moving towards the abandoned house. Rubbing at his eyes, Felix climbed out of the Jeep and headed after them. No one had invited him personally, but it was clear that they had knocked on his door for a reason. He approached the chattering on the violin rule hinges to the door, just as the last dark figure disappeared behind it. The house was the same. At least Callie's eye, but it didn't seem to confuse anyone present. As Felix looked more closely, the darkness thickened further near the stove, and he almost shrieked when he realized that every one of those who had entered the house was peering through the printing hole. He, too, stood at the end of this peculiar queue and did the same thing as the others, bent his head threefold, pulled up his legs, and suddenly fell down. Fortunately, the fall was not far, and he landed on something soft and bouncy. Here below, the darkness parted a little, and a dim light rose ahead. One by one, the balaclaved, standing, and figures stretched in that direction, followed them and Felix. They walked for probably 15 minutes down a long, damp, and narrow corridor, more like a burrow. At first, the walls were just an earthy press of some kind of communist sediment. Water slammed under their feet, and something stank nastily. Then the water disappeared. There was a little more light, and the young man's eyes, accustomed to the semi-darkness of the dungeon, could distinguish a small square room paved with thick stone slabs. All the people present were crowded here. Suddenly, there was a loud clap, and as if on cue, bright torches lit up in everyone's hands. It was quite impressive. Felix even got teary-eyed. Offense to him, torches no one for some reason did not give out. However, resentment did not last long. With a terrible creaking sound, they dissolved. The tall and double doors were clearly visible now, and forged thick iron hood and the whole private company fell out into a huge hall. Quite a place. Felix whistled, looking around. He had only ever seen such interiors in horror movies about bloodthirsty vampires and creepy Satanists. The perfectly round hall was a kind of arena. There were rough wooden benches all around. Torches were burning on the stone walls, and the high vaults were lost in the semi-darkness. Suddenly something swept before his eyes with a sharp whistle and frosted to the floor. But after a second, he realized that it was the most ordinary bat and nervously grinned. In general, there was nothing else noteworthy around the circumference of the hall, except thick curtains and cobwebs. In the center, however, there was something to see. On a small elevation similar to the foreground stood some sort of wide stone table, and on it Felix grew cold when he got a good look at a long, dark, irregularly shaped object. It was undoubtedly a coffin. Some of those who had come seated themselves on benches, while others went to the dais and stood on either side of the stone table, from whence came a sharp dissonance of drumming, and the rest of the company threw back their broad hoods. It made little difference, though, for their faces were black masks, hiding both eyes and noses, and only bright scarlet predatory mouths were fixed in unkind grimaces. Felix suddenly felt sick. He remembered where he had seen recently the same disturbing bright scarlet color of the sun. The same setting sun he had seen on the first evening of his arrival had been exactly the same color. What on earth is going on here? The boy thought, and various not very pleasant thoughts popped into his head. Sounds like they've got a real cult going on here. What if they want to kill him? But Felix immediately chased away his silly fears. It was enough that he'd already embarrassed himself yesterday. He didn't want to give these people, including Emin, a reason to doubt his courage. Greetings, initiates. While he was agonizing, something changed in the hall. Standing closest to the pew, a figure removed her mask. She appeared to be a terribly ancient old woman. Immediately slow, sloppy gray hair, in which Felix recognized, yes, of course, almost 100-year-old grandmother. Only now she no longer looked absent and insane, but looked quite meaningful, strong eyes. "We are glad that you have joined our conclave," she pronounced, stretching forward her thin, wrinkled, empty hand and pointing Krajkov's finger directly at Felix. The deadline would come soon. Having made this exhaustive statement, Granny calmed down and sat down a little further away from everyone else. "Come closer." Felix called him again someone else's female voice. He approached its owner under a black cloak, and this woman had the same as her lips, a blood-scarlet dress. "You're called here by the gods," began with the tone of the stranger, and Felix involuntarily wrinkled again. "They are for the old." How many times, honestly, like in kindergarten? Here he slightly lost the thread of her tragic narrative, occasionally distinguishing only separate phrases such as the age-old war, the great sacrifice of the night, bloody moons, and other such nonsense. However, after listening for a while, he was surprised to note that this speech did not mention anything about the immortal teachings of Tao. And in this great night of vengeance, we will finally be able to restore justice and allow our ancestors to become immortal in the flesh. Suddenly, a woman howled at the highest note, and everyone present picked up on it. Your Felix frowned. It can't be said that all this regular circus frightened him so much. Lately, he'd somehow papa with the fact that his life now resembled more like a lowbrow adventure movie. But when the stranger shafted his dress, took him by the arm, and led him to the coffin itself, at that moment, a lad really realized that he was in serious trouble. In the coffin around which these fanatics were crowded lay a man almost naked and undoubtedly still alive. His chest, feverishly heaving arms and legs were overloaded with strong leather straps, and his face was covered with scarlet. The cloaked men began to chant something long, eerie, swaying from side to side. And Felix somehow had a long, slightly withdrawn knife in his hand. A terrifying melody soared upward to the invisible vault of the cave, and was immediately cut short by a swift movement of the hand. The scarlet priestess ripped the bandage from her victim's face. Felix's legs shook, his breath caught, and icy goosebumps ran through his body, and before him lay his own father. "It can't be," he muttered seemingly aloud, and was suddenly terribly angry. How long would all this nonsense go on? "Kill him," sharply shouted the woman's shafted dress. "Kill him, and reunite forever with your beloved. You and Mun will become the new heirs to a great dynasty, and your firstborn will become the great Dark Emperor." "Why are you talking to Darth Vader himself?" Felix asked, clutching his knife tightly in his hand. "What did he say?" the woman said. "I said that you are all stupid idiots," Felix informed her, unceremoniously grabbed her from behind by her long dark hair and presented the knife to her throat. "Now, gentleman porthole, or whatever you are," he commanded, shocked by this turn of events and a bunch of fanatics. "Do the inhabitants immediately my father, or do I cut to hell your voodoo doll?" A slender figure stepped forward and removed his mask. Felix was no longer particularly surprised to see Moon in front of him. Her face was hardly what anyone would call beautiful now. Distorted with rage, it was scary, like a witch's. "Let my mother go at once," she screamed. "Otherwise, there will be no wedding." "It's okay. I'll get over it somehow," the guy replied nonchalantly, and fucked his mom good and proper. Moon pushed at her hair and tried to jerk away, but Felix held the sharp blades tighter against her throat. "Stand still," he commanded, and turned to the frozen crowd. "Who's in charge here? Does it untie my father? Or do I not speak for myself? Will you regret it?" hissed someone from behind. The guy, who had been practicing martial arts for a long time, had a great reaction. He moved sharply to the left, dragging the hostage behind him, and thus dodging the thin dagger that was a few centimeters away from him. As he looked back, he realized he had been swiped by a 100-year-old broadsword. He pressed the blade with his foot and slid down the stone whip. He moved farther away with it. The bastard bellowed something from his cloak and Ammon's voice. And the father-in-law showed up. Felix rejoiced. "Come on, coward, take off your mask. What do you think you're doing? Now I'll swat you. Are you tired of his masks?" The big guy roared and pulled off his mask and rushed forward. "Nada," shook his head Felix, and pressed the blade to his victim's throat. She stiffened and wildly bulged her eyes. "Yes, amen. Please untie my father, or else I will stab her. I swear on my mother's life," Felix said threateningly, "and I'll get nothing for it. But you'll all go away for a long time. Let him go," Ammon ordered, clenching his teeth in impotent anger. Some of the squares rushed to carry out the order. A moment later, Harry emerged from the coffin, staggering. In one black window dressing, he was gagged and pushed in the back. With an unfaithful limp and gait, he moved toward his son. "What now?" Felix thought feverishly. "How do we get out of here?" "Let the priest go," Ammon shouted in the meantime. Felix smiled and decided to go to the bank. "I have a live grenade in my pocket. Now me and my father will go to the exit, and you will sit here quietly until we leave the room. Or am I going to give you a little fireworks display or not?" Suddenly he changed his demands. Give us the counselor. I'm sure you've got more than one way out here. I'm right. The capes looked at each other and mumbled something in their incomprehensible language. Suddenly, they're all moving forward together toward Felix. And more the circle closed. The executioner's sleeves, flung up each, had the same metal dagger gleaming in his hand. Felix clutched his blade convulsively and almost squeezed it into his mother's throat. He's scary at this point. A trumpeting roar came from the opposite side of the circular hall, and from nowhere a huge tiger leaped across the rows of long benches to the dais, followed by Kate. In person. Stop, she shouted. Stop all this at once. She was holding a real machine gun. She was followed into the room by 3 more men armed with the same flaming arrows. Felix looked at her happily and smiled broadly at Kate. It's about time, he exclaimed. And you brought the tiger cub with you. What a good girl, without listening to his incoherent mumbling. A tall man, in whom Felix recognized Kate's father, stepped forward. Everyone remove your masks and lay down your weapons. This is a detention. Get down on the floor and put your hands behind your back. Says who? He shouted at Eamon, who tried to hide his dagger in his sleeve. Now you can command Kate to Tiger, and he was 1 jump away from the fanatics lying on the floor. While the men were knitting the peacefully lying adherents, Tiger walked beside them growling menacingly, and if anyone tried to move even a little bit and nervously beat on the sides of his long striped tail, that's the matter. Felix said approvingly, nudging Mother Moon toward everyone else. Thank you, Kate. This is the 2nd time you've saved my life. He turned to the girl and looked at her tenderly. You're an Amazon, honestly. The light of the hot torches reflected in his rapturous dark eyes, which made them seem even more beautiful to Kate than they really were. Let's get out of here. She gestured for the boy to follow her. Dad, you can go now. Felix hugged his father's trembling shoulders and took off his t-shirt. Here, let's go for a toss. Shocked man could barely utter his son and cried. It's not far here. Kate looked sympathetically at Harry. There's an ambulance and the emergency services. Can they help you now? They took a completely different route to the exit, a much shorter path than the one Felix had taken with the others. This path was just a narrow one, shot into the rock without any frills, and it went sharply upward after 5 minutes of walking. Crumbled underfoot. Felix's father could barely stand on his feet, and the guy had to carry him on his back and, in this manner, bent in 3 figures. Throw some upstairs, in the narrow space between the responsible steel plates. But within 10 minutes they were on the surface. Here really stood an ambulance, blindingly shining beacon, and a large car of the Ministry of Emergency Situations. And there were some uniformed men crowding the police. Harry was immediately put on a stretcher, covered with a warm blanket, and taken to a place where he would receive qualified help. Felix refused such an offer. Then the emergency workers gave him a thick jacket, and he did not refuse it. After all, it was mid-September and nights in these parts are already quite cool. With a bare torso will not walk for a long time. One by one, the members of the sect with their hands tied behind them were brought out. The last one to come out was a huge tiger from blue, twitching its tail at Mao. Kate approached the predator and stroked it affectionately on its large, stretched head. The big cat came a race to the girl and rather mediocre. You said his name was Tiger, Felix noticed, and reached out to pet the tiger too. In an instant, the tender cat turned into an enraged monster. A huge maw, bared, glistening white fangs. What's the matter with you, boy? Frightened, yanked his hand away. And Kate laughed merrily. It's not a tiger. Can't you see that? It's a full-grown tigress. I don't know about them, the boy muttered grudgingly. You have one in every courtyard here. He tried to make a joke, feeling his head ringing and his eyes blurring. Let's go home. Kate pulled him by the arm. Give me the keys. Do you know how to drive? Surprised. Felix was, but he waved it off. Why do I ask? You're an amazing. I'm flattered by the compliment. The girl gleamed her eyes, merrily climbed into the driver's seat, started the car, and so sharply sank from the place that from under the wheels of the SUV, with a whistle through a whole pile of rocks and sand. In front of Felix put a small glass almost to the brim. filled with some murky liquid. What is it? Distrustfully looked the guy medication. Unperturbedly wagged an eyebrow Kate's father. Or are you not a man? Pretentiously, he frowned. Such a statement angered Felix. He took the glass and knocked it down in one gulp. His eyes immediately almost popped out of his eye sockets, and everything inside burned with liquid flame. The guy coughed and tried to breathe, but it was no good. The people in the city are weak. The man shook his head. But it'll do for the first time. But boy, let's get acquainted. I'm David, Kate's dad, the owner of this joint. Here a new acquaintance grinned his joke and part-time operative of the District Department of Internal Affairs. Felix could no longer be surprised by anything. After the dungeon of local fanatics, he only nodded and extended his hand to the man. Felix, a fourth-year student of the geology department of the university and part-time stockbroker. I squeezed out the naughty words. David laughed and gave him a friendly clap on the shoulder. Well done, Felix. We've been after these bastards for a few years to cover all of them at once, and even at the scene of the crime. Seeing that the guy wanted to ask something, the man shook his head and firmly said to stop asking questions. Tomorrow go to bed and rest. Daughter take our hero to his far. Kate readily stood up and wrapped her strong arms around Felix and led him up the stairs. The guy was like a dream this time in a good dream. Everything around him. After the fire potion he had taken, everything seemed beautiful to him, and his eyes closed by themselves. And when the door to the room opened, he already seemed to be asleep on the move. Kate carefully laid the guy down, covered him with a blanket, stood for a minute watching him sleep, smiled and went out. Turn off the light. Son. His mother's caressing hands, slowing him down on his head. He didn't want to wake up. He doesn't want to go to daycare. He'd rather stay home and watch Winnie the Pooh and drink cocoa. Marshmallow. Wake up, son. Mom. Felix opened his eyes. So he wasn't dreaming. It was really his mother. Are you here? He muttered, hugging her like a good thing. The light ward of the county clinic was now quite crowded. All right, let's start from the beginning, son, Harry said in a dying tone and glanced around at those present beside his bunk, and in a chair perched his faithful wife. The son sat across from him, demanding all the explanations his father needed. There was also Kate, her father the operative, and even a friend, Alex, who had flown in with Felix's mother when he learned that a friend was in mortal danger. A couple months ago, I thought I was dying a little cough, but Harry started to speak. And I really wanted you to marry a girl of our faith. I just couldn't imagine going off into the next world, leaving my son on the wrong path. But you all know very well. I won't repeat the beginning of this story. The day before your wedding, son, a terrible truth was revealed to me. One man here, Harry looked gratefully at Kate's father, and he nodded, slightly smiling at him. A very good man, Harry continued, informed me that the family had defected to the evil side. I've heard such rumors before. Harry sighed, but I couldn't believe them. Yes, Ammon had been a dear friend of mine since I was a boy. Our fathers and grandfathers were friends before he and I were even born. Harry, sadly, I was presented with irrefutable evidence. Willy-nilly, I had to admit that my domain had become a black denunciation. It's an ancient, very ancient sect of fanatics. We thought it had long since ceased to exist. However, who would have thought that this original evil has taken root again, and where in the heart of my home village? Their terrible traditions have included sacrifice for centuries. Yes, Ammon and his many kin were the last adherents of the Black Tao. They rebuilt the ancient shrines. They believed they could make themselves immortal that way. To think Harry clutched his rosary beads in his hands and mumbled some sacred words. All those gathered waited patiently. Finally, he performed the necessary ritual and continued his story. Of course, I immediately called Ammon and canceled the wedding. He got terribly angry and threatened me. But I was far away, and I didn't think his threats were so dangerous. How wrong was I? He covered his face with his hands. Those monsters tricked me into a trap. They met your mom and me at the airport. She managed to get away from them, but they took me away. Yeah, Ammon doesn't forgive that kind of thing. I tried to tell you, but why didn't you explain it to me right away? Felix was outraged. The day you found out about it yourself, you could have told me that you didn't have to go to the wedding. Then none of this would have happened. He stopped suddenly. He flashed a glance at Kate and fell silent. She smiled at him, blushed, and lowered her eyes. All this did not escape her father's scrutinizing gaze. But he only smiled into his mustache. "Son, I just couldn't reach you." The father waved his hands. "Your phone was always out of reach. Or you didn't pick up the phone. What could I do?" Really, Felix admitted. He remembered how angry he had been at his father, how he had not answered his calls. "But you could write me a message," he exclaimed in surprise. Son shook his head reproachfully at Harry. "Don't you know that your mother and I never trust phones with our thoughts?" "Yes, of course we do." Rolling his eyes, Felix admitted. A strange peculiarity of his parents. "And I, in turn, wanted to intercept you right outside the temple." Katie's father entered the conversation. "To stop you from marrying Moon. But when I saw that you did a good job of it yourself, then all the people gathered couldn't stand it and laughed loudly. They laughed and could not stop, remembering how proudly Felix entered the temple dressed like circus performers. I wish we had seen it with our own eyes with father." Wiping away laughing tears, Sophia said, No, I'm not sorry at all. It was a terrible thing to do." Harshly pronounced Harry and you, Felix. "You'll have to try hard to redeem yourself before the gods on another dark autumn evening." The whole friendly company gathered at Kate's inn. The merry revelry went on late into the night. At some point, Felix improved a moment and whispered to Kate, "Let's go for a walk. It has become too stuffy here." The girl gladly agreed. They went outside and leisurely shaved towards the wine meadow, which Felix saw a few days ago. A stunning sunset. It was quite dark now, and only the silvery light of the eternal moon illuminated the surroundings a little. Fast and carried in the dark sky, and the air was fresh and clear, as it is only in early warm fall, Kate. Felix took the girl's hand. "I've been meaning to ask you." "Yes." She tilted her head and looked at him expectantly. "Will you marry me?" Felix waited tensely for her answer, but she did not hurry with him, slyly staring somewhere in the distance. "I don't know," she said. Finally, smiling slyly, "Will you be able to meet all the strict requirements that my father set for my future husband?" Way to give and all that. Felix raised his eyebrows in amazement. "You mean him too?" Kate couldn't stand it and laughed loudly. "Oh, you're no good." Felix pretended to be angry, and then he embraced her. The laughter immediately stopped, and even the moon shamefully hid behind the clouds. "Don't you dare interfere with two lovers. And if your father does not approve of our marriage?" Quietly, she asked at last. "Then I'll remind him of the trouble we're all in." His previous decision, the boy smiled. "Going down a path can be terribly unpleasant at times, can't it?" "I'm serious about you," Kate said resentfully. "And I am serious." Felix answered firmly. "I've had enough of all this. From now on, I will choose my own path. I choose you first." The couple embraced again, and sitting under a large pine tree, looked for a long time at the velvet sky, where someone had lit large, bright stars.